Anyway, let's move on to Ibn al-Arabee. Ibn al-Arabee was a Maliki scholar. He was born in Morocco, 468 after the Hijrah. He reached the level of ijtihad in the Maliki madhab. He traveled to the east in search of knowledge. He studied with al-Ghazali for some time. He eventually ended up coming back to Marrakesh in Morocco. That's where he settled. Among his famous students were Qadi Iyad. In addition to Ahkaam al-Qur'aan, he's famous for Aradatul Ahwadi, which is his commentary on the Sunan of al-Tirmidhi. And he's less well known for a book called al-Mahsul fi al-Usul, which I think is still in manuscript form. Some graduate students have written theses on it in Medina, but I don't believe it's been published. Anyway, here's a passage from Surah al-Isra. They ask you about the soul. Say the soul is of the affair of my Lord, the Ruh. And you, mankind, have not been given of knowledge except a little. He mentions that he treated the subject in greater detail in 2 other books, but he's going to repeat, he's going to summarize what he said there. And he mentions the Sabab al-Nuzul from Ibn Abbas, that the Jews in Medina decided to ask him about the Ruh, despite the misgivings of some of them, and the verse was revealed in response to their question. In another narration, it mentions that when they posed the question, it was to test him, and they said, if he tries to answer this question, it will indicate that he's not a prophet, and that if he declines to answer, it would indicate that he is a prophet. It's a sign of prophethood. And Ibn Arabi then he went on to explain that prophets, it's not their nature to delve into ambiguous issues with their ummahs, issues that would embroil them in matters beyond the human ability to comprehend. Instead, they deal with clear issues. And then he goes on to say, the Ruh is one of the creations of Allah. He placed it in the body, and by it gave life to the body. He taught it and gave it abilities and built upon it praiseworthy traits and noble morals, just as he gave it the capacity for their opposites of all the human failings. If a slave of Allah wanted to deny its existence, he couldn't do so due to its manifest and obvious effects. However, if he wants to know it, even though it is right inside him, he cannot, for his abilities, fall short of it. Most scholars say that it is placed inside him as a token, an ibrah, for taking heed. As Allah said, وَفِي أَنفُسِكُمْ أَفَلَا تُبْصِرُونَ. In other words, the passage before that says, and in the earth are signs for those whose faith is sure, and also in yourselves, can you then not see? In order for them to see that the Creator from naught, al-Bari, none can reasonably deny him due to the clarity of his signs and his acts. And then he quotes this famous line of poetry, في كل شيء آية تدل على أنه واحد. In everything there's a sign that indicates he is one. And he talks about the passage in which Musa, also in al-Isra, it says, and verily we gave to Moses 9 tokens, clear proofs, that is proofs of Allah's sovereignty and proofs of Allah, that he was sent by Allah. Ask the children of Israel how he came to them. Then Fir'aun said to him, indeed, I deem you one bewitched, O Moses. Then he narrates numerous comments about the Sahaba and Tabi'een, explaining what those 9 signs are. Most of them include his staff, his hand, when he pulled it forth and it was shining. The sea, meaning the sea that he split. The flood, the locusts, the lice, the frogs, and blood. Some of them also mention the rock that he split by hitting it with a staff when people asked him for water. Some mention his tongue. What that means exactly is unclear to me. He also narrated, after all of that, he narrates a marfu' narration from at-Tirmidhi that a Jew asked the Prophet ﷺ about the signs that were given to Moses. He replied, "You shall worship none with Allah. Do not commit adultery or fornication. Do not kill the soul which Allah prohibited except in the course of truth. Do not take an innocent person to the ruler so that he will kill him. Do not mock. Do not make false accusations of adultery. Do not flee from battle. And one for you Jews in particular, do not violate the Sabbath." They kissed his feet and hands and said, "We bear witness that you are a prophet." He asked, "What prevents you from following me?" They replied, David, meaning the prophet Dawood, prayed that prophethood would continue among his progeny. We are afraid that if we follow you, the Jews will kill us. So he mentions that others besides Tirmidhi reported it. Al-Albani declared it weak in the hadith program that I use. It compiles his books. Perhaps that's why Ibn al-Arabee, this is me actually, that may be the reason that Ibn al-Arabee mentioned it after all those statements from the Sahaba and the Tabi'een. And then with regard to that same passage that we mentioned earlier, where in Surah Al-Kahf, where it says, one of you should take this money and go in the city and buy some food, he says, this indicates the validity of appointing someone to act on one's behalf, wakala. It's an agreement of agency which Allah has permitted due to people's need of it and its being of benefit. For people are not capable of personally undertaking every activity they have need of without help from others, or they may simply prefer to take it easy and appoint someone else to relieve them of the bother. The recognition is so widespread that the recognition of appointing someone, delegating someone to do something on one's behalf, that this recognition is so widespread in the Sharia that it even enters into some acts of worship as a kindness from Him, glory be to Him, and recognition of human weakness. Allah mentioned it, as you see, and Allah's Messenger ﷺ clarified it, as you will hear. And it is the strongest, meaning this particular verse is the strongest verse in this regard. Some of our scholars found an indicator for the validity of wakala, agency. In verse 60 of Surah At-Tawbah, the alms are only for the poor and the needy and those who collect them. So there are people who are appointed to collect the zakat. And also Allah's statement, "Go with this shirt of mine." This is Yusuf telling his brothers when he's in Egypt, "Go with this shirt of mine and lay it on my father's face. He will become again a seer." Verse 93 from Surah Yusuf. He says, the verse about the shirt is weak, meaning the indication of the verse is weak. While the verse about zakat collectors is good, and it's strong. Its indication is strong with this regard. Jabir ibn Abdullah related that he came to the Prophet ﷺ asking for help so that he could join the expedition to Khaybar. Rasulullah ﷺ instructed him to go to his agent, his wakil, and get 15 wasqs. It's a measure volume of something, maybe grain, maybe dates. If he wants some token from you, place your hand on his collarbone. That was reported by Abu Dawood, the Sunan of Abu Dawood. Albani also declared that narration to be weak. Then he also mentions other cases of wakala. He says the Prophet ﷺ appointed Amr ibn Umayyah al-Damri as his agent to contract marriage with Habiba. He appointed Abu Rafi' to act as his agent to contract marriage with Maymuna, according to one of the two narrations on that incident. He delegated Hakim ibn Hizam to buy a sheep for him. And then Ibn Arabi says, agency is permissible in every act for which it is permissible for one person to act on behalf of another. And he says that occurs in some 25 different matters, and he mentions various matters, some of them in ibadat, some of them in muamalat, interactions. And basically, unless it's something that you're you have to do it yourself, like salat, about which there's no disagreement, or fasting, about which there is some disagreement. So if it's an act that it's only valid if you do it yourself. If it's an act of worship, then nobody can do it on your behalf. With regard to acts that are done for worldly benefit, unless the act is illegal in and of itself, like ghasb, misappropriating people's property, taking hold of people's property, that it's not your property. So to delegate someone to do that on your behalf is obviously prohibited because the act is prohibited. Other than that, it's most things are lawful. Ilah, which is when a person swears an oath that he will not have relations with his wife, because it's an oath, nobody can take an oath on your behalf. So you can't delegate someone to make ilah on your behalf. And vihar, which is something that Allah dislikes, because He dislikes it, and you can't delegate someone to do it. Li'an, where a husband accuses his wife of adultery and he has no witnesses, and so they invoke curses of Allah. Obviously, that's something that you can't delegate someone to do it on your behalf. You have to do it yourself. So he mentioned these 25 different categories, and then he says anything that I didn't mention falls under, it's referred back to one of those categories.